Hello there! Today I'm gonna show you how to make this stylized muzzle flash. Of course, we're gonna use the shader editor for this. And this will be more slow-paced tutorial rather than just an overview as my last few videos. It's also not gonna be as heavily edited as the previous ones, and the reason for that is I simply am not a huge fan of editing videos. It's a very slow process and I just don't have the time for it. And also I'm looking for an editor for my videos. So if maybe you or someone you know is looking for an editor gig for YouTube videos, of course it's paid, then yeah, contact me, let them know they should contact me. Either way, give me a shout, maybe we can work together, who knows. So as for the video, please don't mind the awful minigun animation. I mean, you can see that it's sort of running and then it like cuts because I tried to make this animation with just keyframes. And yeah, animation is not my strong suit. So that won't be part of this tutorial. But if you're into animation, then there's definitely resources online that can teach you that and even more, like, you know, advanced stuff. One I can honestly recommend is by Pierrick Picot. You've probably seen his YouTube videos, and he also has some paid courses where he's going through the process step by step. So yeah, for animation, I would refer you go to that guy rather than me. I'm just gonna show you how to make this muzzle flash in shaders. So after this awfully long intro, let's just go into Blender and let me show you how it's done. Obviously, we're gonna start by deleting the default cube, and then we will start with a simple geometry to just have a reference of where the gun is. Of course, you can just create your own gun or import an amazing model of your creation that I'm sure you have plenty of. But I will just go ahead and create the minigun that you've seen before. So we won't cover the process of creating this in here because it's not only extremely simple, but also like the techniques I'm using is not really correct for probably any application. I just want to have some point of reference for what I'm gonna put the muzzle flash in front of. Right, so with the gun done, let's just move it a little bit backwards. And one thing to keep in mind, we will create this muzzle flash to follow the Y direction. You can see this green line is the Y direction, and the Z direction is going up and down through the plane. So just keep that in mind because it may be important later in the shader editor. So I just don't want you to waste your time writing a comment, hey, my muzzle flash doesn't work, nothing shows up. Well, that's probably because the coordinates are not aligned properly. So just keep in mind what I'm doing is going to be aligned with the Y-axis. So now, Shift A, let's add some geometry and we're going to start with cylinder. The amount of vertices in the cylinder doesn't really matter. You can go with 32, I'll go with 16 because that's also more than enough. We don't really need fancy geometry here. Then we go into the side view and just rotate it by 90 degrees. And then let's bring this one a bit lower like this and make it into this sort of tube-like shape. You know, the ones where they like speak to it and then it projects voice or sound, makes it louder. Yeah, that thing. So we need something like this. And then we don't need the front and also the end cap. So we can just go ahead and delete those faces. Now let's select our cylinder and drag in a new viewport, change it to shader editor, and then click new to create new material. So it's gonna be this part of the muzzle flash. So basically race, shooting outwards, shooting very fast. So let's get to it. First of all, we don't need a principled BSDF, so we can just delete it straight away. Then we need a mix shader and then also emission as well as transparent BSDF. Like in most of my videos, just connect it like so. It's nothing new in here. And then the mix shader goes into the surface. And yeah, you cannot see anything, so let's go to the rendered preview. We still cannot see anything, but that's much better, just trust me. We start with a texture coordinates, and then we drag from object outwards, and then we look for a gradient texture. Change it from linear to radial. Then drag in from color and now look for a noise texture. Make sure that it's connected like this. When we preview the noise texture, you can see that we have a streaks already going on. In order to see it better, we can also add a color ramp. Then change the interpolation to constant and bring the white value a bit closer so we can actually see the streaks going on. Perfect, but we don't want them to be cut off abruptly, like so. we need a little bit smoother transition between the streak and the end of our geometry. So we will copy this gradient texture, and this time we change it from radial to quadratic sphere. It also has its origins in the texture coordinate object. And now let's preview this quadratic sphere. You can see that we have something going on in the middle here. That is because this sphere is being drawn from the object pivot point, which is that orange dot right here. So in order for our origin to be back here, we have to just select the object, go to options and change affect only origins, and then simply move the origin point somewhere at the beginning of our mesh. We can check this off again. And now you can see that our mask starts at the front, or rather at the back of the muzzle flash. Now we look for a math node, change it to multiply, and then we want to multiply this mask with the result of our noise texture streaks. So your result of this multiply should look something like this. You still have streaks, but they are, well, restricted by the mask that we have here. In order to make this mask longer, so you have a control over like how long the streaks will be, we have to add a vector math right here in front of the quadratic sphere, change it to divide, and then a value so that we can divide all the values at the same time instead of 3 separate ones. Now let's preview this gradient texture. You can see that as we increase the value, the mask also increases. So I recommend you bring it to something like this, so that at the very end of the geometry you still have black values, which is 0, so that we won't see the ugly cutoff again. And now if we preview this, you can see we have those streaks going outwards and ending before the end of geometry. And then we can bring this into our color ramp. And as you can see, we have our mask going on. So now let's lay in some colors. So we will start by changing the black to something reddish, because that's gonna be like the very tip of our muzzle flash. Maybe let's make it a bit darker as well. Now this one really depends on your taste and whatever you're going for. I will not overdo it, but yeah, you can spend here as much time as you need. And you can see that the streaks are not really streaks right now, but rather like a fairly blobby shape. And that is because our noise texture has default parameters so far, and we can help that as well. So let's just change the roughness down to 0, add some distortion maybe, like 3, then scale it up. And as you see, the higher scale, the more fragmented the muzzle flash, the noise becomes. So yeah, feel free to play with this and see what works for you. But I will move forward, and the last step is to sort out our transparency, because obviously we don't want to see like this red spill all over the place. So first very important thing is select the mesh, go to material settings, and make sure that the blend mode is set to either alpha clip or alpha hashed or alpha blend. You can explore the differences of those three on your own. Clip basically deletes all the nuance between visible and invisible and treats it just like mask. Something either is visible or not. So if you're going for stylized look, I would highly recommend this one. And then we need to just put this mask into our mix shader factor. Let's move this color ramp a bit lower and connect it to the emission. And then drag from this multiply outwards and get another math node, and here change it to greater than. So anything greater than this value here is gonna be visible, everything else invisible. So you can go to quite low value, something like this, if you want the streaks to be fairly separated, or if you want just like a more blobby shape, then just put it higher. But I will go for something like this maybe, and then don't worry about it that it's so small, because remember we have always this value here that is just gonna extend it basically further outwards. So just make sure that you work with those values, you know, adjust it, make it something you can be proud of. I'll probably keep it something like this, and then here. And now this is the mask which directly goes into the mix shader factor. And as we preview this one, you can see we have the base of our muzzle flash. Of course, the colors are all wacky, so simply go back to the color ramp and just adjust it as you want. So yeah, maybe the yellow something here, maybe a little bit of the red only at the end, on the edges, and maybe like pure white at the very base. So just here. And yes, this is the first step. Great job so far. One more thing, of course, it's a muzzle flash. It's an explosion. It's fire. So What do we do with this? Of course, we go to the render settings, we check bloom, we crank the intensity all the way to 0.1, and then in the shader, under emission, change the strength to like 5. So we're sure that the muzzle flash has its oomph, like it's there, it's right there. So yeah, great job on that. The last part is the animation of the muzzle flash, because obviously, yeah, you can see this is a minigun, right? So if it's shooting real fast, a lot of bullets at the same time. So we need this to, keep up. So we go into this noise texture, simply change it from 3D to 4D, and then 2 extra nodes, and we are done. First one is a simple value, second one is a simple math node. Now, in the value, you put hashtag frame, case sensitive. Make sure it's small letters, frame. Enter. With every frame of the animation, it's gonna change its value. And then we plug it into this math node, change it from add to divide, and then the divide goes into the W value, which is the seed value. So different value, different result of the noise texture. And now, if we click play, you can see that it's already doing its thing quite fast. If you want to change the speed of it, simply go to this divide node, and the second value, the higher it is, the slower the noise is. So if you go to 1, it's like super hectic, it just goes all over the place. 10, a little bit slower, but still fast. So feel free to experiment again. I will leave it at 5, because reasons. And as you can see, I didn't do it that well, because the minigun has like guns here. And I have this muzzle flash going like here. Not the greatest, but you can just simply scale it up. And yeah, that should do the trick. Just one thing, if you have like a gun with more than 1 barrel, make sure not to put like the muzzle flash on every barrel separately, because then it's gonna look ugly. Just trust me. Even though it's not physically accurate, and at the end of the day, we are making a stylized muzzle flash, so it's not gonna be physically accurate, Get over it, I guess. So yeah, first part is done. Let's just name the material properly. So this is a muzzle flash 1. I'm sure you have a better names for it, but this will have to do. Muzzle flash 1 mesh is the mesh name. With this out of the way, we can just go ahead and create another one. Shift A, mesh, cylinder, again, 16. More than enough. Just rotate it by 90 degrees, so it's again sideways. Same as before, let's just scale it down and also make it much longer, because right now we are gonna do this bad boy. So this is basically the streaks or like the lines of the bullets, let's say, that's going out of the minigun. And as you can see, mine doesn't go like that far, but don't worry, there's a way to control how far do you want it to extend. So let's just make it longer, maybe like this, move it a little bit here. And the same as before, we don't really need the caps. So let's just delete this one. And also let's make this end a little bit bigger, just so that it looks like the bullets have spread, which is a nice thing. I mean, everyone knows we are not making a sniper rifle, so it's gonna have some spread. And this face also has to go, because we don't really need it. And we can make it a little bit smaller as well. So when you're happy with your model, it should look something like this. Just select it. Let's go to the material preview, and in the shader editor, we don't really click new to create new material, because it's gonna be very similar to this material. So we can just go ahead and select the material that we already created, muzzle flash 1. And then, in order to create new one with the same base, we just click this icon, which is gonna duplicate this material. And now we can just change the name to something like bullet trails, because that's what it's gonna do. And again, very important, let me isolate this. You can see that the pivot is again here and not at the beginning of the mesh. So make sure to adjust that. Again, origins, let's move this a little bit here, because it's gonna use the mask again. So make sure that it's at the beginning. And now let's go back, let's click this mesh. And here, instead of having this quadratic sphere mask that is basically showing us how far this thing should extend, I mean, we can as well use this one, but also I could just show you another way. So, you have some options. So why don't we do that, right? And it's also very simple. It's not that complicated. You just duplicate this vector math, change it to length, and then connect it from object like so. Those three you can just simply delete. We don't really need them. When you preview this length, you can see that we have a super bright value on here and basically dark value here, because it's the length from the middle of the object, from the pivot point of the object. So it should be 0 here and then some number here. We don't know. We don't really need to know. But it's definitely more than 1 because you see it's glowing, which means it exceeds the 0, 1 value. So next thing we need is a map range node, which we're gonna plug in here. And as you can see now, it's not glowing anymore because it basically takes whatever and puts it in between 0 and 1. So how it really works, no one knows. Some people call it magic, but we will just use it in order to have our mask to extend from our origin point and then all the way up as far as we need it. In order to visualize it better, let's just get a color ramp and then we just invert the values because we know that black value is invisible and white is visible. So now when we increase the from max, you can see that very, very beautifully our mask is extending. So again, let's make sure that the very end, the tip is black, so that we have a nice smooth transition and we don't have a strong cutoff. And now similarly as before, we take this mask and we just plug it into this multiply. So we sort of like mask whatever the result of the noise texture is. And as you can see, we have the streaks and they are ending about here. If we preview this, you can see that we have the streaks indeed, but first of all, they end way too soon. That is because this greater than value is the threshold of how much we actually want to keep visible and invisible. So we can keep this about here, I guess. And then the second thing is you can see that we don't really have breaks in those stripes. And that is because if we look at the result of the noise texture itself, you can see there's like a lot of gray values in between. So what we need to do is we need to just make it a little bit more crisp. So before it goes into this multiply, we need a color ramp. So we can just simply Shift D, copy that one. So it goes in between the noise texture and this multiply. We can even change the interpolation to constant to have like real crisp values. So something like this. And now you can see we have those streaks. If those are like too thick for your liking, you can just up the scale or like up the distortion as well. And then we have, you know, like thinner ones. And then you just control how much of them will be visible. Maybe something like this. I guess, yeah, that's enough. And then they are getting masked by our lengthy mask. And so now when we preview the mix shader, you should see that we only have, you know, nice streaks visible. But of course, the colors are all wrong because they are from the first shader. So let's just adjust that. The white, we can keep it fairly down there, if at all. I mean, it's really up to you, but maybe there is okay. Then because it's just a bullet trails, I like to keep it fairly simple and also not with such a sharp transition. So I just delete this orange, keep it just yellow and red and change the transition, the interpolation, sorry, from constant to linear. And as you can see, we have a nice, like really soft gradient transition. And then we can also bring this lower just to make sure we don't see any of that white thing. And then this one maybe something like this. So we have a nice, yellow to red transition. If we click play, because we set up that muzzle flash movement before, we should see this one going on as well. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but yeah, the aliasing is kind of killing it. So let me just play with the scale a little bit of the noise texture, just so we have something more, you know, readable. Maybe something like this. It already starts to look like muzzle flash, but there is still 2 more things that we need to do just to, you know, bring it to the next level. So next thing is gonna be a sphere this time, not cylinder. I know, big surprise. And same as with previous things, we just rotate it by 90 degrees and then move it a little bit here, like closer. This is gonna be this part. So basically the very beginning of where the rifle ends. So as you can see, we don't really need the whole sphere, just half. So let's go right in and then maybe delete like here, and also all of this and this one. Yeah, maybe let's make it a little bit flatter as well. Something like this. Seems fine enough. Now this is gonna be straight up a ripoff of this muzzle flash. So we can simply go ahead and with this new mesh selected, go in here and choose the muzzle flash 1. And same as before, we duplicate this material and then put another name, just so we are not confused. This is muzzle flash beginning. And here, first thing is we will need to go to the greater than node and just bring it down a little bit, maybe to something like 0.06, so that we can see what we're doing basically. Then let's go all the way back to decrease this value so that our mask is not encompassing the whole mesh. Something maybe like this. Yeah, good enough for start. And then also the noise texture is a bit too noisy. Let's bring it to something more reasonable, like, yeah, 3. This has quite a nice shape to it already. And so to distinguish it from those streaks, we can also up the roughness a bit, but also let's bring the detail up first. And then as you increase the roughness, you can see that the streaks, they become more, you know, jagged. Like the lines are, you know, not so smooth anymore. Something like this, which I think will tie in nicely with everything else, with the rest. And maybe the greater than is too great still. Something like half of this, and then bring this value down even more. Just so that we have those streaks don't go all the way in here, but they have like this common area in here where they just grow from. And yeah, I mean, the shape looks all right. The mask that we are using to mask out the mesh is basically the same as here. There is no more tricks that I can teach you how to do the mask in different way. I guess 2 is the limit. And so if you're happy with the shape, then the last thing is to change the colors. So let's just bring these values in a little bit. Something like this, maybe. I guess that's all right. And again, because we already set up this animation, we can just click play and see all of this play together. I think that's quite nice already. We have all the 3 layers. And then the last, the sort of, you know, cherry on top would be those sparks that you can see right here. They look quite nice, and I think they add a little bit of that nuance to the whole thing, because right now this one kind of feels block-ish. And so I think like the small sparkles add a little bit of life into the whole thing. So again, as always, we just take this first, the original, the OG muzzle flash, Shift D to duplicate this, and then we edit it to make it slightly larger than the OG, and then maybe also a bit longer, the mesh itself. Then we can name it also Sparks Mesh. And then again, as before, this icon to duplicate it, change the name. Make sure that you have better naming conventions than this, because if you have bigger scene, it becomes unmanageable. But for this tutorial, this will have to do. So the only difference between these strikes and the sparks is the type of noise we're using. So in this case, we're using noise texture, but what we are looking for is a Voronoi texture. Now, we don't really need this gradient texture anymore, and there's noise texture, so let's just delete them all together. Our animation nodes go into the W value, which is here, by the way, only if you use 4D, so make sure you do. Plug it right in here. And then we drag from the object again, and we look for a vector math node. Then we change it from add to multiply, and then set those 2 first values to 1, which is X and Y. And then we keep the Z value to 0, just so that when we plug it into Voronoi texture, you can see that they are slightly stretched going outwards from our gun. If we keep all of the values at 1, you can see that they are fairly, you know, proportional and same size. But as soon as we bring this to 0, they are nicely stretched, and that's exactly what we need. So now, in order to change this into sparks, we first need to change the mode from F1 to smooth F1. And the next thing we need to invert it, because we want only the sparks, which is those nice dots. The problem is now they are black, and we want them white so that they will be visible after the whole masking thing is done. So we are looking for a invert node, plug it right after. Now you can see we have this bubbly texture, and right after that a math node, but instead of add we need a power, so that when we increase the exponent, you can see that those bubbles get smaller and smaller and also more intense in the color. And we just want something maybe like this. We don't want too many sparks, but yeah, I will leave it for you to adjust. And then just like before, we take this power and we mix it up again with the mask. That's gonna basically tell us how much of this mesh can we use for the sparks. Now, as before, when we preview the shader, you can see that, well, not much is going on. And that's because, again, the greater than has to be adjusted as well. This is what ultimately show us what is visible and what's not. So as we decrease the value, you can see that more and more is popping. So keep it fairly low, maybe something like this, 0.03. Seems to work for me, and if it works for me, should work for you as well. Now when we preview, we can see the mask is doing its job. The last thing to adjust is the colors, because right now they are only orange. And I want to give them a little bit of yellowish in here. And maybe some of that. We can delete this white altogether because we really don't need that in the sparks. And so as you see, it's going all the way to the border. If you don't like it, you want to just, like curb it, you can just bring this value down and that's just gonna mask how much it's visible. But I feel like this is appropriate. And if we want to preview all of this together, we just click play and we see the whole thing in action. Looking at it now, I think this is way too much of sparks. And then again, there's two ways to control it. You either increase the greater than value to like mask out what's visible, or you increase this power exponent value, which is gonna make those dots more intense, but also less of them visible. As you can see, it's like, it's hard for me to explain. I mean, I'm not native, I'm sorry. I gotta take some English courses, I guess. So yeah, I think this is the appropriate number of sparks. So yeah, that was definitely a long one and probably painful to watch because of lack of editing and stuff. But yeah, maybe then you will appreciate, the edited content. And also, again, if you or someone you know is a editor savvy guy who is looking for a paid gig, again, I'm not looking to hire someone for free or exposure, as it often happens in YouTube, then give me a shout, send me an email or something, and hopefully we can work together on something. Because yeah, I just simply don't have time for editing all the videos, which pains my heart, sincerely. And as for the tutorial, as always, if you manage to put it in your scene, make something out of it, I would love to see that. I mean, it really makes my day, as corny as it may sound. So make sure to tag me on Twitter. Link for that in the description. Some projects of mine are available on Gumroad. Link for that is gonna be also in the description. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.